Hey there, YouTube. Today I'm going to be doing a deck tech around a commander that I like a lot, and I feel is pretty powerful, and that is Goreclaw, Terror of Qal Sisma. She is 4 mana for a 4/3 legendary creature bear, and what her abilities do is creature spells you cast with power 4 or greater cost 2 generic mana less to cast. And then she also has an ability of whenever Goreclaw attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. So obviously this is going to be a mono green deck with a lot of big creatures in them. Obviously searching for that power 4 or greater. So first up, we're going to have some mana ramp. One of the biggest things about this deck is getting Goreclaw out earlier, so that you can then start casting all of your creatures with power 4 or greater faster. Goreclaw making them cost 2 less, plus your mana ramp, you can really get some explosive turns and some really big creatures out really fast. So obviously first up we'll have Soul Ring, 1 mana, taps to add 2 colorless, should be in every commander deck. Then we got a bunch of different elves here. So we have Llanowar elves, Fyndhorn elves, and Elvish Mystic, all of which do the same thing. They're just 1 mana for a 1/1 that tap to add a green, tap to add a green, and tap to add a green. Then we also have Arbor Elf, which is 1 mana for a 1/1 that says tap, untap target forest. This kind of works the same way, but there is one little cool combo in the deck around this card. Where we have Yavimaya, which turns all lands into forests. And then we also have a Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx. So what that can do is it turns your Nykthos into a forest. So then you can use it to tap it for mana equal to your devotion to green. And then you can untap it with Arbor Elf. So, little combo there. We also have a Sakura Tri-Builder, 2 mana for a 1/1. He reads Sacrifice, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tap, then shuffle. Then we also have a Naga Vitalist, just 2 mana for a 1/2. And he reads tap, add to your mana pool 1 mana of any type that a land you control can produce. These 2 mana creatures are in here just to get Goreclaw at least down by turn 3. And then we have 2 cards that are pretty similar. We have Elysian Caryatid and Whisperer of the Wilds, both of which cost 2. One's a 0/2 and one's a 1/1. Whisperer has the ability of tap, add a green to your mana pool, and then Ferocious, which is tap, add 2 green, but you can only activate this ability if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, which obviously that's a theme of our deck, so we should have a creature with power 4 or greater to turn on that ability to add 2 mana. And then Caryatid reads basically the same thing, but it's for any color, which doesn't really matter too much in this deck because we're mono green. But tap, add 1 mana of any color, and then if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you add 2 mana of any one color instead. We also have a Rampant Growth, 2 mana, search your library for a basic land card, put it into play tapped, then shuffle. We have a 3 Visits, which is sort of similar but a little bit better. 2 mana, search your library for a forest card, put that card onto the battlefield, not tapped though, and then shuffle. We also have an Emerald Medallion, which is 2 mana artifact. Green spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And we also have a Kodama's Reach, 3 mana, search your library for 2 basic land cards, reveal them, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and 1 into your hands, then shuffle. And we have a Cultivate as well, 3 mana, sorcery, search your library for 2 basic land cards, reveal them, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand. So basically the same thing as Kodama's Reach. Then we will start to get into the creatures with power 4 or greater. So first up we have Nylea Keen-Eyed. She is 4 mana for a 5/6 indestructible. She's not a creature unless your devotion to green is 5 or more. And then she reads creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And she also has an ability of 3 mana, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a creature card, put it into your hand. Otherwise, you may put it into your graveyard. So she works really well with Goreclaw. If you have both of them out, now all of your creatures cost 3 less to cast, or at least the ones that have power 4 or greater. So that is a pretty huge discount. We also have Wolfbriar Elemental, 4 mana for a 4/4 with multi-kicker of a green. And then when Wolfbriar enters the battlefield, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield for each time it was kicked. So with your discounts from Goreclaw, this only costs 2 mana. And then you can kick it, 3, 4, 5 times and put that many 2/2 wolves into play. We also have a Gem Razor, which is 4 mana for a 4/4, but it has an ability of Mutate for 3. It is a Reach Trample, and whenever this creature mutates, destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. So we don't have a lot of mutate creatures, but this can mutate onto pretty much anything. There's very little humans in the deck, because this only can mutate onto a non-human. But it is a 4-power creature, so it would cost less with Goreclaw. And it can just make like one of your elves a little bit bigger, turn one of your elves into a 4/4 Reach Trample. And obviously that ability of when it mutates is very good in Commander. It can destroy anybody's artifact or enchantment. We also have a Garruk's Pack Leader. It's 5 mana for a 4/4. And whenever another creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. We also have a Conclave Naturalist, 5 mana for a 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. So this is kind of like a Reclamation Sage, except that it costs a lot more mana. But in this deck, if you can reduce it by 2, then all of a sudden it is a 3 mana for a 4/4 that destroys an artifact or enchantment. We also have Wandering Archaic, which is 5 mana for a 4/4. Whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, they may pay 2 colorless. If they don't, you may copy that spell, and then you can choose new targets for it. And this is a flip card. So on the other side, it is Explore the Vast Land, which is 3 mana for a sorcery. Each player looks at the top 5 cards of their deck, reveals a land card and or an instant or sorcery card from among them, then puts the cards revealed this way into their hands and the rest on the bottom of their library, and then each player gains 3 life. So that side's not going to come up too often, especially considering we don't have that many instants or sorceries in the deck. But this side is very good, especially when you get it down for 3 mana. Next up, we'll have some 5-drops. Well, actually, Wandering Archaic was a 5-drop, but we have some beefier ones. We have Elder Gargaroth, which is 5 mana for a 6/6 Vigilance Reach Trample. And whenever he attacks or blocks, you choose one. You can either create a 3/3 Beast token, you can gain 3 life, or you draw a card. We also have God Eternal Ronas, which is 5 mana for a 5/5 Death Touch. When God Eternal Ronas enters the battlefield, you double the power of each other creature you control until end of turn. Those creatures gain Vigilance. And he has the God ability. Whenever he dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put it into its owner's library 3rd from the top. The doubling ability is very good with Goreclaw's ability, because not only will they gain Vigilance from Ronas, but also all of your creatures that then have power 4 or more, which should be almost all of them, especially once he doubles all the power. When those creatures attack, they also get +1/+1 and trample. So now you're attacking with some really huge creatures that have Vigilance and Trample, plus double power, plus +1/+1. So a lot of power coming at you. We also have Battle Mammoth, which is 5 mana for a 6/5 Trample. And whenever a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. And then Battle Mammoth also has Foretell for 4 mana, which is you pay 2 and exile it face down, and then on a different turn you can pay just 4 mana to cast this. And I believe that does work with Goreclaw's ability too. So then it would only cost you 2 mana. We also have Kogla, the Titan Ape, just 6 mana for a 7/6. When he enters the battlefield, it fights up to one target creature you don't control. He also has another ability of whenever he attacks, you get to destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls, and an ability of pay 2 mana, return target human you control to its owner's hands, and Kogla gains indestructible until end of turn. Like I said, we don't have a lot of humans, so I don't know if that third ability will come up too often, but he is just a good card on his own. We also have Thunderfoot Baloth, which is 6 mana for a 5/5 trample. He has an ability called Lieutenant, where as long as you control your commander, Thunderfoot Baloth gets +2/+2, and other creatures you control get +2/+2 and have trample. We also have another Baloth. We have Rampaging Baloth, which is 6 mana for a 6/6 trample, with the ability of Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may create a 4/4 green beast creature token. We have our other mutate card in the deck, which is Sawtusk Demolisher. 6 mana for a 6/6 with the mutate ability of 4. He has trample, and whenever this creature mutates, you destroy target non-creature permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 beast token. I think this is a very underrated card. I don't see it in too many deck lists, like maybe people forgot about it, because it came from that very powerful Commander 20 Ikoria set. But if you mutate this for 4 mana for a 6/6 trample, plus you get to destroy something and make a beast token, it is a very good card. So it's kind of like a Beast Within, but attached to a 6/6 trample body. We also have Kodama of the East Tree, which is 6 mana for a 6/6 reach, and whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't put onto the battlefield with this ability, you may put a permanent card with equal or lesser converted mana cost from your hand onto the battlefield. Next up is Primordial Sage. It's 6 mana for a 4/5. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you may draw a card. And in the same vein, we also have Soul of the Harvest. 6 mana for a 6/6 trample. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. And then we get to some 7 drops here. We have Verdant Sun's Avatar, which is 7 mana for a 5/5. Whenever Verdant Sun's Avatar or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. We also have a Thorn Mammoth, which is 7 mana for a 6/6 trample. And whenever Thorn Mammoth or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Thorn Mammoth fights up to one target creature you don't control. So this is a very cool card. Basically makes all of your creatures entering the battlefield into fight machines with Thorn Mammoth, which as a 6/6 can take down pretty much a lot of creatures. 7 drops are also good in this deck because if you go to the curve of 4 mana at Goreclaw, she would make your 7 drops cost 5, so then that would curve perfectly from your 4 to your 5. We also have Dawnglade Regents, 7 mana for an 8/8. When it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch, and as long as you're the Monarch, permanents you control have hexproof. And we have everybody's favorite Avenger of Zendikar, 7 mana for a 5/5. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each land you control. And Landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. We also have a World Breaker, which is 7 mana for a 5/7, Eldrazi. It is devoid as well, so it has no color. And whenever you cast World Breaker, you exile target artifact, enchantment, or lands. It also has reach, and then it has an ability of pay 2 and 1 colorless, which has to be colorless. Sacrifice a land, return World Breaker from your graveyard to your hand. Next up is Terastodon. It's a big elephant, 8 mana for a 9/9. When it enters the battlefield, you can destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. For each permanent put into a graveyard this way, its controller creates a 3/3 elephant creature token. And we also have a Woodfall Promise, also 8 mana for a 6/6 trample. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-creature permanent, and then it also has Persist. So when it dies, if it had no -1/-1 counters on it, you return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a -1/-1 counter on it. We also have an Endraze Forerunners, which is also 8 mana for a 7/7. It has Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. And when it enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain Vigilance and Trample until end of turn. This is basically my Craterhoof Behemoth in this deck. I wouldn't exactly call this deck budget, but it's close to being budget. And then I just don't own any Craterhoof Behemoths, and I don't feel like paying $40 to $50 for it, so there's that. We also have Apex Altasaur, 9 mana for a 10/10. When it enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control, and it also has the ability of Enrage. So whenever it is dealt damage, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. And another 9 mana creature, we have Void Winnower, which is an Eldrazi. It's an 11/9. Your opponents can't cast spells with even converted mana cost, and your opponents can't block with creatures with even converted mana cost. Alright, next up we're going to get to some card draw engines here. So we have Garruk's Uprising, Colossal Majesty, and Elemental Bond, all of which are pretty similar. Garruk's Uprising is probably the best out of them. It's 3 mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card. Creatures you control have trample. And whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you draw a card. Colossal Majesty is also 3 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card. And there's Elemental Bond, also 3 mana. Whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you draw a card. And then we also have Lifecrafter's Bestiary. It's 3 mana artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, you scry 1. And then whenever you cast a creature spell, you may pay 1 green mana. If you do, you draw a card. We also have Beast Whisperer, 4 mana for a 2/3. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you draw a card. And Shamanic Revelation, 5 mana, you draw a card for each creature you control. And it also has the ability Ferocious, where you gain 4 life for each creature you control with power 4 or greater, which obviously in this deck should be a decent amount of creatures, because a lot of the creatures we're playing have power 4 or greater. We also have the Great Henge. This is 9 mana, but it doesn't really cost 9. It costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So even if you just control Goreclaw at 4 power, this is going to cost 5 mana, which is a pretty good deal. And then it has tap, add 2 green to your mana pool, and then you also gain 2 life. And whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. Next up, we're going to have some removal pieces. So we have Lignify, 2 mana enchantments. You put it on a creature, and then that creature is a 0/4 tree folk with no abilities. We also have Ram Through, just 2 mana instant. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. If that creature has trample, access damage is dealt to that creature's controller instead. So this is very good with Goreclaw, because Goreclaw can give any of your creatures that have power 4 or greater when they attack +1/+1 and trample. And then so you can attack with, let's say, like a Terracodon that's a 9/9. It then becomes a 10/10 with Goreclaw's ability and gains trample. And then if you ram through something, any access damage that is dealt from the Terracodon as a 10/10 gets dealt right to the controller. Plus they still have a 10/10 trample attacking them. We also have Kenrith's Transformation, 2 mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and then enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a green elk creature with base power and toughness 3/3. We also have the classic Beast Within, 3 mana instant, destroy target permanent, so that is any permanent. Its controller puts a 3/3 green beast creature token onto the battlefield. We have a Reclamation Sage, 3 mana for a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. We also have a Force of Vigor, which is 4 mana instant. If it's not your turn, you may exile a green card from your hand rather than pay this spell's mana cost. So it is free if it's not your turn. You just have to exile a green card from your hand. And you can destroy up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments. We have one of our other win conditions here, Overwhelming Stampede, 5 mana sorcery. Until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So this is good if you start off with, let's say, like a bunch of elves or other low mana creatures. And then once you start getting Goreclaw running and making all of your really huge creatures cost less, you can play Overwhelming Stampede to give all of your creatures, let's say +7/+7 and trample, plus couple that with the ability of Goreclaw attacking, pumping them up even a little bit further. Could be looking at a lot of damage. We have a See the Unwritten, just 6 mana for a sorcery. Reveal the top 8 cards of your deck. You may put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield, and then put the rest into your graveyard. But it also has that keyword ability Ferocious, where if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you can put 2 creature cards onto the battlefield instead of 1. We have a Turn Timber Symbiosis. It's a 7 mana sorcery. Look at the top 7 cards of your deck. You may put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield. If that card has converted mana cost 3 or less, it enters with 3 additional +1/+1 counters on it, and then you put the rest on the bottom. And this is also a dual face modal card. Modal dual face card. Turn Timber Serpentine Wood on the back. And it enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. So if you pay 3 life, it enters untapped and can instantly give you some green mana. If you don't, you can always just play it tapped. We also have a Road of Return, just 2 mana sorcery. You get to choose one. You can either return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, or put your commander into your hand from the command zone. And it has Entwine of 2, where you get to choose both modes then. This is good for if your Goreclaw has died a couple times in the game, where you don't want to pay 8 mana for it or 10 mana. You can Road of Return it, and then just cast it for 4 from your hands. We also have Eternal Witness. It's 3 mana for a 2/1. When it comes into play, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Notably, this is a human, so it works really well with Qal, where you can return Eternal Witness to your hand, play it again, return something else, and then return Eternal Witness back to your hand. So you can get a loop there. But also it is slightly bad because it can't be mutated onto. We also have a Bala Gad Recovery, 3 mana sorcery, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So that is any card. And then this one is also a dual face. On the other side, it's Bala Gad Sanctuary, where it just enters the battlefield tapped and can add a green mana. We also have a Fierce Empath, 3 mana for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost 6 or greater, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So this is good for finding something that you need to get you out of a pinch, something to destroy a permanent, or something to try to win the game with, something to kill a creature, anything like that. We also have Ecological Appreciation, which is X and 2 and a green, so X and 3. Search your library and graveyard for up to 4 creature cards with different names that each have converted mana cost X or less and reveal them. An opponent chooses 2 of those. Shuffle the chosen cards into your library and put the other 2 onto the battlefield, and then you have to exile it. So let's say if you play this for X is 5, which would be 8 total mana, so 5 into the X and then 3 other. You can search your deck for 4 creature cards that would each have mana value 5 or less. And then your opponent chooses 2 of them. Those 2 go bye-bye, but then the other 2 go right onto the battlefield. We have a Court of Bounty, which is 4 mana. When it enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a land card from your hands onto the battlefield. If you're the monarch, instead you may put a creature or land card from your hands onto the battlefield. We also have a Heroic Intervention, 2 mana instant. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So very good against board wipes, and it's also good against just spot removal. We also have a Nissa Who Shakes the World, 5 mana planeswalker. Whenever you tap a forest for mana, you add an additional green mana to your mana pool, so it doubles all of your forests. And then also a +1, put 3 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 target non-creature land you control. You untap it, and then it becomes a 0/0 elemental with vigilance and haste that is still a land. And the ultimate is -8, where you get an emblem with lands you control have indestructible. You also search your library for any number of forest cards, put them onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. And then we will close it out with the mana base. So we have a Castle Garenbrig, which enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest. It taps to add a green, and then it has an ability of pay 4 mana and tap it, where you add 6 green to your mana pool. But you can only spend this mana to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. So it does +1 your mana with this ability, but you can only use it on creatures, which is not really a problem in this deck. We also have a Blighted Woodland, which taps to add a colorless, and then you can pay 4, tap it, and sacrifice it, and search your library for 2 basic lands, put them onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. We have an Oran Reef the Vastwood, enters the battlefield tapped, taps to add a green, and then you can also tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that enters the battlefield this turn. We also have a Treetop Village, which is a man land. When it enters the battlefield tapped, it taps to add a green, and then you can also pay 2, and it becomes a 3/3 green ape with trample. We have Bonder's Enclave. Taps to add a colorless, but it also has the ability of pay 3, tap it to draw a card. Activate this ability only if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, which once again, with the theme of this deck, that should be pretty easy to accomplish. We have Mosswort Bridge, which has Hideaway. So when this land enters the battlefield tapped, when it does, you look at the top 4 cards of your deck, exile 1 face down, then put the rest on the bottom. It taps to add a green. And then you can also pay 1 green and tap it, and you can play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if creatures you control have total power 10 or greater. We do have the Yavimaya legendary land. Each land is a forest in addition to its other types. We also have a Nykthos, which taps to add 1 colorless, but then you can pay the ability of pay 2 mana and tap it, choose a color, and then add to your mana pool an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. And then we will round it off with just a lot of forests. So some pretty cool ones, a lot of full art ones that I have in here, a lot of the Nicol Bolas lands, I have some unglued ones, and even some Theros broccoli looking Pokemon lands. Alright. And then that is the deck there. So that's Goreclaw. Like I said, I like this deck. I think it's a pretty powerful commander. Let me know what you think, or if you have something that's similar that's built with, maybe a mono green commander or anything like that. Let me know in the comments. Make sure you like the video, subscribe. I put out some other deck techs that you can watch. A lot of different commanders and different themes, everything like that. Some are casual, some more competitive. And then also I do a lot of box openings. I had a lot of Modern Horizons and some of the D&D set recently. All right. All right, everybody, have a good night. I'll see you guys later. Bye.